The Cartoonerific podcast is sponsored by the Wonderful World of Animation Gallery, home of rare and wonderful fine animation art. Visit their website at wwagallery.com. And for our Cartoonerific listeners, you will receive a special 10% discount off any purchase if you purchase by March 25th, 2024. Just go to wwagallery.com and enter code CARTOON10 for your 10% discount. Once again, this discount is only valid until midnight, March 25th, 2024. Once again, visit wwagallery.com.
The following is a Cartoonerific Studios presentation.
Welcome to Cartoon Fun, it's Cartoonerific, yeah! It's Cartoonerific, Cartoonerific, it's Cartoonerific, with your host Brian Mitchell.
Well, welcome to the Cartoonerific podcast, Classic Animated Cartoons. I'm Brian Mitchell, and I am your host. Last week, we had Dave Pruiksma doing the first part of a two-part interview, and that was a lot of fun. We were bouncing around a bit and talking about a lot of different things. You know, I try to keep these things on a straight and narrow as far as his history goes, but then we talk about a bunch of different things. And a very good friend of mine said to me, you know, that's actually good because, you know, it sounds more like a real conversation. And I hope that's the way it does come across because it was a real conversation. So there. Anyway, stay tuned. It's a long one, so just get your popcorn ready, get that beer or that coffee or the sody pop or whatever, and we'll be back right after this, so don't go away.
Cartoonerific is the place to be to celebrate hand-drawn animated cartoons. The Cartoonerific podcast features interviews with the magic makers behind your favorite animated cartoons, with episodes uploaded every Friday. Or visit the Cartoonerific blog featuring articles about classic cartoon animation. At the Cartoonerific Gallery, view original animation art and memorabilia from your favorite animated films and TV shows. The company store features exclusive swag from the Cartoonerific universe. And coming soon, brand new world premiere cartoons on the Cartoonerific channel. It's all here. Join the fun at www.cartoonerific.com. That's cartoon, ERIFIC.com. It's Cartoonerific, saving the universe one funny cartoon at a time. And now it's time for our special Cartoonerific guest.
Well, as promised, here it is, part 2 of our two-part interview with Disney supervising animator Dave Pruiksma. Enjoy. I'm just going to point this out because I noticed this in 101 Dalmatians. Anita changes design somewhere from the beginning of the film to when you actually, when she actually starts talking in the film.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like she had a smaller nose, but then somehow there's a change that happens.
As you know, that happens in animation because everybody draws slightly differently. And,
right.
You know, that was the thing I loved about traditional hand-drawn animation, was that I could actually see
who did it,
elements of the animator in the work.
Right.
And to me, that was kind of a bonus because, you know, we were seeing it before cleanup.
Right.
And we were seeing, the blush of, the performance from the animators. And you could sit there at dailies and go, oh, I know who that is. Without even seeing the slates, you could know whose scene was whose.
Oh, absolutely.
And it was always very fun and exciting to see that. And I could see it. I can see it now. And when I look back at old cartoons like MGM or Hanna-Barbera or, Warner Brothers or any one of those. I can now tell the animators, even after it's been cleaned up and inked and painted.
Oh, sure.
I think that's a testament to what you're putting into it. If you're putting a lot of yourself into the drawings and the performance, it's going to show. So yeah, getting back to the Dalmatian stuff, I think that it would depend on who was animating the scenes. There would be a little bit of deviation from the model.
Exactly. Okay, now we're gonna try to delve back into your career.
Okay.
When they pulled you from Cal Arts, you're working on Mickey's Christmas Carol, or was that the first thing?
Over there, I was in training with Eric for about 3 months. We all were. Right. And we would do tests, and we would, do a scene, and then that would be shown to the powers that be, and they would say, "Oh, this guy looks good," and whatnot. Right. And we'd work with Eric on them, and he'd make suggestions and changes, and do drawovers and stuff like that. Right. Until we finally were through our 3 months. Right. And then they would say whether they would pick you up or not. Right. And I think they picked up I know in our group they picked up everybody, but there were times where they wouldn't necessarily. You might go back and work, at Cal Arts or work at a different studio for a while and hone your craft even further. Right. But all of us were picked up, and we went immediately on to Mickey's Christmas Carol, or most of us did. Right. And most of us became what they called a rough in-betweener. Right. So, and it used to be every animator had their own rough in-betweener, but back then they were already starting to cut costs. So I was working as a pool in-betweener for Jay Jackson, Ed Gombert, and Toby Shelton on Mickey's Christmas Carol. Right. And I would do in-betweens for all of them, which to me was great because by rolling through and seeing their charts and seeing their timing and their drawings, I could learn a lot about the thought process that went into animation. Right. As I was doing those drawings, and also learn how to draw consistently. Right. To match a style. And so I thought that was a really great trial by fire thing. And then you work your way up through, like a beginner, second stage to journeyman to assistant animator, and then animating assistant, and finally animator. That's how the system worked back then. Right. So you started by working with Eric, and then you would go on to production, working for animators and being mentored by them. And then you become an animating assistant where you'd work with a specific directing animator who would work with you on your scenes. What did Eric Larson, did he just stay in training, just training new people, or was he kind of thrown in at time to time doing some stuff on these films? Eric would do lectures periodically, and he was always there in his office. Right. If you had a scene that was troubling you, or you were struggling with a drawing or whatnot, you could go to Eric and say, "Eric, I'm struggling with this scene. I don't really know what to do at this point." Right. And he would do something simple, like he would turn the page or rip peg holes and turn the paper a little bit, or, do a slight tilt to the head or something like that. It would be something very simple, but it would be something that only a trained eye could see and zero in on it and go, "This is it." You could look at something and say, "There's a problem." That's a master for you. Yes, there is, and this is it. I had a teacher like that. He was an anatomy teacher, and he could fix your drawing with a couple of lines, maybe 2 or 3 lines, and that was it, because he was master, and that's what Eric Larson was. He was a master. That was Eric. He was an absolute master. He didn't have he had the patience of a saint. And he would just slowly tell you or explain, or he'd think about it. Sometimes he'd just think for a while. And you'd be standing there going, "Should I go and get a cup of coffee?" But he wanted you to learn the process of thinking. So you study him. He taught us that too. Right. Because he'd say, contrary to what managers, they wanted us to sit down and just start doing drawings, because, if you could do 5 drawings an hour and this many hours, it'll be done. Yeah. That's not the way it works. No, it doesn't work. You might do 100 drawings to get the right one. Yeah. But they never understood that, and they never will.
The thing is that if you have the idea in your head and you got the chops to draw it, you could probably animate that thing in an hour and a half. If it's really clear, you can, and of course it's going to be sketchy. That's right.
Yeah.
But the thing is, you could get it all out. But the thing is getting that idea. And I've heard stories about Ward Kimball just basically kind of just reading magazines and stuff like that. Like you walk into his office and he'd just be like, puttering around, not doing anything. And then he was trying to formulate like what he was going to do. But then he would just, once he had the idea, just sit down and just do like 50 feet in an afternoon. Yeah. And 50 feet to people listening to this is a lot of work. I mean, it's basically, it's a little bit over half a minute. Yeah.
It's, a lot of the guys did that. And, but Eric always said, think.
Mm-hmm.
Who is the character? What needs to be communicated here? What makes the character unique? All of these things, it was like a laundry list of things that you need to think about. Are there props you can use? Does the character move around?
Right.
And then things will start to suggest themselves, much like an actor going onto a set and going, oh, okay, I could sit over here. I could pick this up and play with it while I'm delivering a line. That's the kind of way we were taught, and I always approached a scene. Okay, because a lot of the films I was cast on two characters, Victor and Hugo, or
right,
Flounder and Sebastian, or and I was like, okay, if you had the same scene and one of them you play the scene with Flounder, or you play the scene with Sebastian, or you play the scene with Victor, play the scene with Hugo, it's going to be completely different.
Right.
It's going to be completely different. And so you first have to kind of put on that persona, and it all has to come through that. And I'm not saying that's not done anymore. I think I should back up and say, when I'm saying that people don't think as much as they used to, there is so much talent. I know that from teaching. Mm-hmm. There is so much talent out there. It's unbelievable.
Right.
The technology has brought a lot of fast learning, but a lot of people aren't challenged to do their best as much. I think that's the point I wanted to make in all that. It's not for lack of knowing or lack of wanting to do it.
Right.
It's the opportunities given. There is no doubt in my mind that another Renaissance can and should happen.
Right.
But if people continue to just accept the pablum that they're being sold, then it loses its art. It loses its art form.
Well,
but there's no doubt in my mind that there's talent. I would never denigrate the artists that are working today. They're working hard,
mm-hmm.
but they're not being asked the same questions. They're not being asked to do the same thing. A lot of people in management seem to think that everything happens in story, which is not true.
Right. Because
you can have a really good story and you can have lousy animation, and that can kind of pull it down.
Yeah.
And it's, but animation can't solve a bad story,
Exactly.
So everything's got to come together. And I think animation should not be just about making storyboards move. I think it should be bringing something more to the table. But that's not what's being required right now.
So basically what we're talking about is, you have point A and point B, and basically you're just getting it from point A to point B instead of looking at the scenes as a piece of entertainment by itself.
Right. And that takes time, which is expensive. And
that takes talent too. But it's a combination of a lot of different things to work that out, to work out a scene. You can get a scene from point A to B because then you're relying on maybe something you've done before, or, and you don't really want that. I mean, for classic Disney animation, every single scene is entertaining in its own way. You can watch that scene over and over and over again and get something out of it,
Yeah, exactly. It's like, what makes this scene inherently watchable?
Yeah.
It's almost like thinking of it in terms of kinetic art. What makes it interesting? Could you turn off the sound and watch it, and would it still be interesting?
Yeah.
Like getting back to what we talked about with the cards, it's like, that's kinetic art.
Yeah. We're going to go back a little bit, because when I when I was a kid and I was learning this stuff, I had the movie camera. I had the stop motion movie camera. I had the projector.
Yeah.
And they used to sell these. This was before videotape. This was basically when you could go to a store and buy an abridged version of a sequence from Pinocchio or Sleeping Beauty. And I remember having one. It was The Dwarf's Dilemma, which was Snow White.
I remember that one well.
Yes. And I didn't have it in color.
The hand washing sequence or something
Yeah.
like that? Or,
Yeah. So it was in black and white.
Yes.
And I remember watching this I had a little moviola that basically you cranked it with your hand and you could look at it frame by frame and really study. You could study the movement. And I was always amazed how good each scene worked and how, the quality of it. I had another piece from Cinderella too, and the stepsisters rip the dress off, and they rip it to shreds. And she runs out into the garden, and the fairy godmother. And I would basically look at that stuff. I'd look at it for the effects. I'd look at the run. I was like 10, doing that. Yeah, just fascinating.
We did it too. Same exact thing.
Yeah, but that's before videotape. That's before everything. You didn't have access to this stuff, you just didn't.
Well, when I was at Cal Arts, we didn't have video either. Video didn't come in till later.
Yeah.
So we had 16 millimeter prints of all the features.
Wow.
And including Charlie Chaplin features and other things that we could study on a flatbed moviola in the library.
Also
behind
wonderful
a partition.
stuff.
And we'd sit there and we'd study and we'd bring out our sketchbooks and we'd watch the features and study how it was done.
Yeah. A lot of talk. Yeah. Big fan of Chaplin. Big fan of all the sound stuff. The sound stuff with Laurel Hardy.
It's brilliant. I remember watching Modern Times for the first time on the moviola at that studio, and I was laughing so much the librarian had to come over and tell me to be quiet.
There you go.
I was disturbing people because I was just roaring. We had headphones on, and that scene where he's like tightening the nuts, and he goes nuts a little bit. It's just so funny. It's a really funny movie.
Yeah. I think it's even more funny when you're doing that. You have the headphones on, you're laughing, and then people are listening to you laughing, but it's just like they can't hear what you're listening to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So,
it makes it even funnier.
they think you're nuts or something,
Yeah. That whole sequence where the machine is feeding him. It's just so funny.
It's hysterical. It's great stuff.
And Buster Keaton is another favorite of mine.
Buster Keaton was great. Ben Turpin.
People say, oh, well, they're old and they're black and white and they're so, that's so old fashioned. It's like, it's not.
No,
it's not.
There's gems there.
It's the pure core of entertainment.
Absolutely.
And visual gags and clarity and communication. It's no less valid than our alphabet, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. But people automatically discount that stuff as like being, oh yeah, that's not great.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's old. I'm not interested. Steve Carell is the big thing. It's like, sorry, Steve. Nothing personal.
I like Steve Carell, but it's nothing like. Look, he works with what he does. I like what he does, but. When I was growing up, I said this on a couple of podcasts ago, I used to hate when the local station here, was WOR, would run these Fred Astaire Ginger Roger movies. Yeah. And if Top Hat, and they were always running Top Hat, and I was like, I'm not watching that. I turned it off, if it was on, I'd turn it off. That would be it. And then somewhere in my 40s, I should really give this a shot. I've always been kind of negative toward that stuff. And then I watched it and I was like, this thing was actually funny. It was really well art directed. And then the music was wonderful and the dancing was actually almost like a special effect on its own, And so I ended up watching all 10 of these Fred Astaire Ginger Roger movies. Because they're really good. They're really good. There's a reason why, they were so big back in the 30s and 40s, in the 40s. So
I think, and I still think they have validity because it's the purest form. And I like modern film. I watch a lot of modern film. It's
Sure.
really beautiful.
Yeah.
Sometimes the technology makes it, they can do things that they never even could have dreamed of
Right.
before. So that's good. But sometimes I feel like the technology takes precedence over the storytelling or the character development.
Right.
And that saddens me a little bit.
Yeah. But, you know, I look at a film like Singing in the Rain, and, you know, don't turn off the podcast, you people out there, because I know some people are like, you're talking about this. Singing in the Rain is a great movie. And I look at that thing and I'm like, I'm amazed because we can't do that today. Or I think we haven't done it. We haven't really done anything like that today. And I don't know if
it's of an era, but it's still inherently interesting.
Yes.
I mean, it must have been really something in the early 50s when it came out. But I mean, it still is pretty remarkable to watch the work that those people did.
Yeah.
And it's very funny.
It's hysterical. It's great music, great choreography.
Yeah, but, you know, that was a parody of the silent movies, you know,
Yes.
so that they were making fun of the past.
That's right.
In the 50s, you know, in Technicolor with stereo sound, they were making fun of the early musicals,
Right.
and early sound films.
Absolutely. And it's really a great movie. So if you guys haven't seen it, you guys and girls out there haven't seen it, you need to watch it because it's absolutely
A lot of
amazing
very
movie.
famous filmmakers from recent past and now think it's one of the better films ever to be made.
Yeah. And it still hasn't been, I don't think it's been topped for, I mean, it's a breezy, I think it's 90 minutes, 96 minutes.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that it's over because it just goes up.
Yeah.
Boom, boom, boom.
Yeah.
It's very much like an animated film. A lot of the MGM pictures, the musicals from that time, the later musicals, have a very animation feel. They're so crafted, you know, almost every frame is crafted. And you know, there's a reason why Gene Kelly started incorporating animation into his films because he saw that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right, let's get back to animation.
It's all communication.
It's all communication. It's entertainment. It's entertainment.
Yes, it is.
And when it's done well, which some of the films that you're working on, we're coming back to getting it all together. You know.
Yeah.
We
were very, very lucky group of artists to be able to work that.
Your first animation job was what, on Great Mouse Detective? Character animation?
First as an animator?
Yes.
Well, I animated right from the beginning, even though I was called a rough in-betweener. Ed Gombert and all of the guys that I worked with gave me scenes to animate.
Oh, that's cool.
Little scenes.
Yeah.
Like there's a scene in Mickey's Christmas Carol where Scrooge snaps open a foreclosure on the mortgage. You know, he snaps open the scroll.
Right.
And I animated that, you know.
Oh, cool.
Because Ed said, just take this one and do it. I don't have anything for you this week. And then I would animate fair folk, you know, or the secondary characters in a scene, or I'd animate overlapping fabric or something like that on Islandly or something like that.
Right.
Eventually they'd say, okay, well, here, do the pig in this scene, you know, do Henwen.
Wow.
And I would do that. Or the scene didn't work that another animator did. And they'd say, Dave, why don't you take this and rework it? And I would do that, you know.
Right.
So I was animating right from the beginning, but I didn't actually get the title of animator until Mouse Detective. You are correct. Even though I was animating on that film. I was called an animating assistant, and I was working with Mark Kent.
Yes.
God bless him. And
wait, is he gone? He's still around, right?
No. He's still here. I'm so thankful that he picked me to work with, because he taught me so much about subtlety in animation. I can't even look at animation the same way anymore. You know, he would kept pulling me back,
right,
and making me more finessed.
Right.
But I have to tell you, it was frustrating. But I'm ever so thankful to him for his patience.
Well, you know, it's the early times when you're doing that stuff where, you know, why am I doing this? I had a guy I was doing animation. I was training him. I won't say his name. He's at Disney now, but but I kept making him improve his cleanup. And he thought it was perfectly fine. I said, no, you don't understand. And I would have to like go through and say, no, this has to be like this. And, kind of nitpick a little bit, but it made him better. It made him so much better. But yeah, he's an excellent artist. He's really come a long way. So
yeah. Well, I don't think we realize when we're learning, just because we can't see it doesn't mean it's not valid.
Right.
And I have to say, sometimes people would go over my work and I don't see it. I don't see it. And then they'd say, okay, Dave, we got a new trainee coming in. Why don't you teach him what we taught you?
Right.
And as I'm doing it, I'm going, oh, I see it now.
Right.
But I didn't see it at first,
Right.
But it got in there and it stuck. So
yeah, it's wonderful. So Great Mouse Detective, what did you end up working on? Did they assign you a character? You're all over the place on that, right?
I was working under Mark Hand, and Mark was doing Dawson and Basil, and he would hand me scenes. They weren't like heavy acting scenes because Mark had the chops to do that, and he was young and he was animating. But and he would give me scenes like where the character's walking away from the camera or something like that, or where Dawson is reacting to something, and he'd say, "Okay, Dave, do this," and I do some Olivia scenes and things like that. I already had kind of like they saw the forte in that I did cute, appealing characters really well.
Right.
So I would often get cast on those kinds of characters, like Dawson and Olivia and whatnot. So, and Kathy Zelensky is an example of, she did the kind of sort of monstrous characters. So she was doing fidget scenes at that time.
Right.
They were very good at like thinking of us in terms of actors and actresses and casting us where we would shine, which was really fun. And so I was working under Mark, and every scene I would have to make it to his approval first, and then it would go to the directors for final approval. And so, but eventually I would just go, Mark would say, you can just take this directly to the directors, and I would do that. And, it would be okay. But, it was all just going through the steps and paying your dues and learning.
Right. Now I believe you worked on the Chipmunk Adventure. Did you take a little sabbatical? Did you take a sabbatical, or were you working with Glenn Keane on that? Or
there's different reasons why people ended up there, but almost all of us ended up there at one point or another. Some people in freelance and other ways. But what happened was Oliver and Company was going into production, and it was a disaster, an absolute disaster.
Right.
And we needed to seriously upgrade the story and re-record songs and all kinds of stuff. And they had this huge staff sitting around. And, that was in the era when they were cutting corners everywhere they could.
Right.
So what they did was they issued an edict where they laid people off based on your what is it? Your job status.
Oh, okay.
And I had just been promoted to animator, so me and a group of us were let go for an unspecified amount of time.
Right.
And you can't. Bills keep coming in. You have to do something. And I had friends that were over at Chipmunk Adventure.
Right.
Because you didn't have a lot of options back then. You had Hanna-Barbera, which was seasonal. You had Filmation, which was doing a feature, I think, at that time, and you had Chipmunk Adventure.
Right.
Or these little commercial houses.
Right.
And fortunately, Chipmunk Adventure was hiring people to do layout poses, which was like animation poses for the layout.
Yeah.
That they could then send over to be animated overseas. And so I went over there and I started doing that, and they liked what they saw. And then they started thinking, let's animate some of this here. So they had us start to animate on these sequences. And then as more and more people got laid off, and I think Glenn left the studio on purpose. He wasn't laid off, but he said, I'm leaving.
Right.
For whatever reason, I don't remember anymore. And so he came over and he worked up there for a while. And slowly at one point they called Glenn and said, why don't you come back? And he said, okay. So he left Chipmunk Adventure and came back, and Will Finn was there, and I was there, and a bunch of people there. And I met so many wonderful people there, one of which was Ralph Eggleston, who later went on to do art direction. We just lost him. He passed away yesterday of cancer.
I heard that. Yes.
Very sad.
Yes.
Because the friends you make in the trenches of animation, they are lifelong.
Yep.
And we grow up and old together.
Yeah.
And it was sad to lose him.
Yes.
I've been thinking a lot about him today.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that.
What's that?
I was sorry to hear that.
It was sad.
Yeah.
But that's why we were over there. And I have very fond memories of Ralph there because he was really, really irreverent, which made it really fun.
Right.
There's nothing more fun than an irreverent animator.
Sure.
They are just wild. So we made that picture, and I was a sequence director on that. They gave me my mother sequence because it was sweet and heartfelt, and I directed the animation. And what I did was I would hire people who were still at Disney to moonlight and animate at night.
Wow.
So I had Jay Jackson working for me. I had Kathy Zelensky working for me.
Cool.
And I had a number of people animating for me from Disney. Right. And the sequence came out looking pretty cute.
Right.
But again, it was the process of making that film. It was just get it done, make it move.
Right.
It's not high art. And I can look at stuff and I can separate myself from that,
Yeah.
But it was a job and it kept food on the table. And, I don't really care for the characters. I hated working with the Bagdasarians. And, but it was an opportunity and you did it. A lot of people have done things they're not particularly that interested in,
Right.
But you do it for whatever reason. There are reasons why you have to do things like that. And I was fine with that. I wasn't a snob.
Right.
I did the best I could,
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So when you finished up on that, did you go back to Disney or were they ramping up then?
Disney called me before the end of that and said, this is kind of nice. Ed Hansen, who was in charge of animation at that time, called me. He goes, "Hi, David, it's Ed Hansen." I go, "Well, hi, Ed. How are you doing?" He says, "Fine. I understand you're over there working on Chipmunk Adventure." I said, Yeah. Keeping, bread on the table. And he says, "Well, I think it's time you came home to Disney." And he used those words. And I go,
right.
"Oh, okay." Please. I'm thankful for Chipmunk Adventure because it was an opportunity to work on something, and people love it, and I don't get it myself.
Yeah.
It's like it's just like, okay, well, and that's personal taste.
Right.
You can't dictate what people should like and shouldn't like, but I don't particularly care for it. It's not my cup of tea. I was able to go back over and I kept my skills sharp. So
right.
when I got back to Disney, I was more valuable to them.
Right.
And at that point, we finished up Oliver and Company. And then the next thing you know, it was Mermaid. And boom, the creativity explosion began.
Yeah. And I guess that's when it started to get valued. I guess after, there were a couple of movies that came out during that time, which was like, Blue Mercantile, right? So you had that come out, which did very well. Land Before Time, I think, was a couple of years after that. But Roger Rabbit was somewhere in between there. I think 1988, right?
Yes.
1987, 88, somewhere around there.
Yeah, it was a slow build. And what would happen was Bluth would put out a feature and it would do well,
right?
Showing that there was an audience. And then we would do one and it would eclipse that one,
right,
at the box office. And then they would put out one and it would eclipse us. And then we'd put out and it would eclipse them. It was like layering and building.
Yeah.
And then Roger Rabbit came out and it was just an explosion because that was a renaissance that started people thinking about how great the old cartoons were. Mm-hmm. Not that we had ever forgotten, but the general public was saying, what happened to these cartoons?
Right.
They were so wonderful. And then Mermaid came out right after Roger Rabbit. And that was a movie where, this is again my understanding, that was a movie where adults could go and enjoy it as much as their kids.
That's right.
And people would go on dates.
Yes.
To see Little Mermaid. And so it showed, this transcends kiddie fodder. This is pure entertainment. This is motion picture magic.
Right.
And from there, cartoons weren't relegated to Saturday morning anymore. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I love Saturday morning cartoons, but
good ones.
It put us in a new category where people were not ashamed to go see an animated feature.
Exactly. I'd worked on the. I got my start in the business really working for Ralph Bakshi on the Mighty Mouse show, the Mighty Mouse.
Oh, I remember that show, sure.
And that.
So you know the Bagdasarians then.
Oh, yeah. Well, I heard the stories, believe me, between a gentleman named Ken Boyer and John Critzfalusi. And
Ken worked in the same office as me, I remember.
Yeah. So, so I heard all the stories, and I think the dog got flattened by a car, which is a very sad thing.
Dog. Her name was Tiger Lily.
Yes.
And she was a little Yorkie, and Janice would bring her into work, and she'd let her run in our office. But that dog was so smart, it could sneeze on command.
Wow. Janice
would come in, she goes, Tiger Lily, sneeze. And she'd go,
wow.
So funny. She was a cute little dog, and unfortunately she got out and was like run over by a car.
Right.
At their home.
Right.
And that was very sad because I know they loved that animal.
Very sad.
Of course, then they had to take it and make it a story point.
They made it a story point in a Mighty Mouse cartoon. They called the character Mashy the pup.
Yes, Mashy. Yes.
And
they had Ross in it, and when he talked, Cheerios would come out of his mouth.
That's right. I think they called it Orids. I think that was the cereal name.
Yeah, the Mole Rats or something.
Ellery and the Tree Weasels. Yes.
Yes, that's what it was. Yes. Yeah. And they made fun of Ralph of David Seville, I'm sorry, not David Seville. What's his name? Ross Bagdasarian.
Yes.
Who was the son of the guy who created the Chipmunks.
Yeah, so it was Ross Bagdasarian and then liked. Ross Bagdasarian Jr. Yeah.
Right. And so they made horrible fun of him. It was so funny. But it was all an inside joke. So unless you knew Ross, you wouldn't understand why Cheerios were coming out of his mouth when he talked, or why he was so weird and abusive.
Oh God. Lawsuits are gonna come, I'm telling you. They're going to sue me.
I'm surprised they didn't back then. That's a long time ago.
Wow, that's funny. That's funny. So I've heard. Believe me, I've heard stories. But I was working on that, and and the industry was kind of like there was a slow build, and I attribute some of that to the video cassette releases that they were putting out, because all of a sudden these films were being exposed onto home video, and Disney was making a pot full of money on Pinocchio. And I can't, they saved Snow White for like one of the last ones, but it was like Sleeping Beauty was released. And then, I don't think Jungle Book, I think they were rolling them out by popularity, so the least popular.
It was a perfect storm. And Dalmatians was one of the biggest hits. But what they do is they release it to a theater like they did in their cycle. They used to do 7-year cycles.
Yes.
They release them to theater, and then after the theater run would go out, then they put out the video cassette.
Right.
And that would make people, we got to get this for home,
Yeah. Until they pull it back into the vault. Yeah.
It was pretty smart.
It was. But they were looking at it, and they didn't want to do that for a long time. They were really just like, if we put it on, somebody came in and they put it on a chart, and they said, okay, re-release 25 million, putting it out on home video, 100 million, and I guess they looked at that and they were like, and they made a lot more than 100 million on some of these titles.
Which in a way is great, but it's also sad because there's something really special about seeing those classic films in the theater.
Oh, absolutely.
They were made for the theater screen. They were made for, projected light. They're luminous.
Yes.
And that's where they really shine.
Absolutely. But back in the 70s in New York, they had a film festival, I think around 1973. It was the 50th anniversary of the Walt Disney Company, right? 1923, 1973. Yeah. And so they had the Walt Disney Film Festival at Lincoln Center. And so they showed the whole library of films from live action to animated at this film festival. It went for the whole summer. Every week it was something different. And then they got the bright idea of doing this in theaters all over New York. So every summer, every week would be a different movie. And so that's when I first saw Pinocchio. and Mary Poppins and Lady and the Tramp. Sometimes, and these would be double billed with a cartoon in between.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was great. So they did this until maybe about 1978, from 1974 to 78, 79, something like that. But I got to see all these films, Song of the South, Cinderella, Ichabod and Mr. Toad. It was all released on the big movie screen. It was great. It was great. Yeah. And I went every week.
It's a treat to see it.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wish they'd still do it. Put them out on limited release, put one theater, per city. And then...
Well, my understanding is that they're going back and they're remastering a lot of them again.
Right.
Because apparently there was some monkeying around being done on them, and they didn't look the way they were supposed to look, the way they originally looked.
Right.
They looked, and that's not to say that it was done on purpose. It was done because of the different medium.
Right.
Suddenly we're in video, and let's face it, you put that DVD in a player and play it on several different screens, it's going to look different on every single one.
It's going to look different.
A good balance between them, but they're trying to go back and remaster them to the way they looked in the original Technicolor release.
Right.
And that's going to take a while, and it's going to take some money. So I don't know if they're going to eventually do all of them or what, but my understanding is that they're kind of moving in that direction.
Well, that's good.
Which is good.
Yeah.
Personally, I don't think there's any bigger thrill than seeing a 3-strip Technicolor print of those.
Oh, it's gorgeous. I've been talking about that.
That's the way they were meant to be seen.
Absolutely. It's eye candy. I try to explain this to people.
And not just Disney. The Fleischer stuff, anything that was shot in 3-strip Technicolor,
MGM,
outstanding.
Yes,
by today's by standards then and now.
Yeah, absolutely. Once again, something that you can't really recreate. I mean, there are TVs that you got the clarity and all that stuff, but you can't get those beautiful hues that came across on a motion picture screen. From Technicolor.
Well, when I was growing up, and you too, when we'd see cartoons on TV, even, at first they were black and white.
Right.
The old cartoons, they were grainy NTA prints. They were not good. And when I started seeing early color films, you could almost hardly tell they were color. They were so muddy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then Turner got a hold of them and he started remastering them a little bit.
Yeah.
And over the years, now I see Warner Brothers cartoons that look as good or better than they did when they were first released.
Absolutely.
And MGM, Tom and Jerry's, the Tex Avery's, they just looked like they were just made.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's kind of amazing.
It is amazing. Well, thank God of technology, right? That we can kind of bring some of this stuff back.
Well, technology is not a bad thing. It's a good thing, but it should not drive creativity.
Exactly.
That's why when I hear about AI, art and stuff like that, I think,
right,
it's ridiculous.
It really is. You went from being a character animator and doing Little Mermaid. You worked as an animator on Little Mermaid, primarily on Flounder, or?
Primarily on Flounder. I did a lot of the Flounders in the Part of Your World. Glenn and I worked together on that. Glenn would do his aerials, and then I would animate my Flounders to his aerials.
Right.
He would leave a space for me, but then I still had leeway to do stuff that I wanted to do. Like there's one scene where she's warm on the sand, I think is a scene, and she's hovering over the sand, and Flounder kind of comes in and then burrows into the sand. That wasn't in the boards. That's stuff that we put in. I put in.
That's entertainment.
Because I thought, well, let him burrow into the sand, like he's sleeping under a blanket of sand,
Right.
And stuff like that. So there was some creative flexibility, but I mean, Glenn would usually, because it was Ariel's song.
Right.
So Glenn naturally would lead, and he would just put like a circle where Flounder would be. And then I'd later take his drawings and roll through them and animate Flounder to match the beautiful movements that he did with Ariel.
Wow. So
that was one sequence. And that sequence almost ended up on the cutting room floor. Jeffrey did not like it.
Wow.
And yawned. And, he just was not a fan. And they made some changes and they made it work. And thank God it's still in there because it's really the heart and soul of that film.
Right.
It's a gorgeous sequence.
Yeah, I heard he wanted to cut it. He wanted to cut part of your work.
Oh, yeah. I was at the thing. Glenn and I sat together in the screening room, a few seats back from behind him, and it played through. And he just turned and went,
Wow.
Made a exaggerated yawn thing like that.
Yeah.
So But in a way, he was responding the way an audience might respond. He didn't know how to fix it, but he knew there was a problem with it. Right. So they added some Sebastian here and there to cutaways, and that seemed to make it work for him. And fortunately, it was successful.
Was the objection the song itself, that he didn't like the song?
Jeffrey couldn't sit still very long. He liked action. He liked movement and big laughs every 2 seconds.
Right.
And, it was difficult for him to sit through something emotional like that.
That's where pacing really comes in, like really knowing pacing. And because even music is not, if music was always, bump, 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 like that,
right.
It wouldn't play. It needs rest. It needs opportunities to open up.
Exactly. That's the nail right on the head. And that's I don't think Jeffrey, again, I didn't talk to him about this. It's just what I've gleaned from watching him.
Right.
He didn't really get it. It wasn't his cup of tea, but it was important for the film. And fortunately, the good directors knew how to say, okay, Jeffrey, we'll deal with it. And then they would come and find a creative solution.
Right.
And that's what they did. And it worked. So I worked on the Flounders, and I worked on some Sebastian scenes, and I worked on
you were saying you worked on the little
seahorse messenger that Ed Gombert has put in. They liked what I did with him so much that they started adding him in other places, and that's, I think, where I really started getting noticed, because the studio was so small back then. I could do the character design, I could do all of the animation,
right.
I could do the model sheets. I even did color selection on the character,
right?
And or color suggestions, not selection, because color model would do that.
Sure.
And I get little sequences that I would do with both characters, the seahorse and Sebastian interacting, and so that was my opportunity to kind of shine. And Ron and John, I think, noticed it. Ron was more vocal about it. There was a scene where he's introducing Sebastian at the beginning. They had added that later, and he's doing these little spins, and he's going, Sebastian,
right?
And Ignatius, Crustasius, Sebastian. And Ron looked at the scene with me, and he goes, "That's good, Dave." And I go, "Well, thanks." And he goes, "No, that's really good, Dave." And I go, "Well, thanks." And he just looked at me and he kind of smiled, and he always would do this thing with the beard, the red beard.
Right.
"No, Dave, that's really good." And I go, "Oh, he means it's noteworthy."
Yes.
And that's the first time anyone had ever done that with me.
Right.
And I was like, "Oh, okay, I'm doing something right, so I'll keep doing it."
Yeah.
And at the end of that film, then Rescuers Down Under, and I was not cast as a supervising animator on that, but I was going through some difficult, rocky times in my personal life, and I wasn't doing particularly well emotionally.
Right.
And
it happens.
Yeah, and
everybody,
they noticed that my footage had gone down, and I explained to them what was going on, and they were surprisingly sympathetic. And they pulled me off with a handful of other people to do a short for EPCOT called Cranium Command. It was Rob Minkoff originally, and then they pulled. He was the one that spearheaded it, and it was for the. It was for a pavilion. There was like an animatronic show, but this was like the pre-show for that. And it had General Knowledge and Buzzy, who was a cadet. And there's people that were inside your head. But Rob was directing it, and he asked for me to be the supervising animator on the Buzzy character, which is one of the two main characters in it.
Yes.
And I said, okay, my first chance to supervise on a short. Right. So I started doing model sheets and whatnot. And then Rob got pulled off of it to do one of the Roger Rabbit shorts.
Right.
And they brought in Kirk and Gary.
Oh, wow.
To direct it.
All right.
And they did a great job. And I got to animate. That was the first time I got to work with them.
Okay.
And while I'm doing that, I'm also doing corrections on Mermaid for some reason.
Right.
Mermaid wasn't released yet, and they had me reanimating scenes that other people had done that weren't working. And, so I was kind of doing Buzzy and kind of doing Mermaid and kind of doing Rescuers, and it was kind of all over the place. But the short was very fast. We did it in the summer, and it was really fun.
Right.
And people still love it.
Yeah.
And then because of my work that I did with Kirk and Gary on that, they asked me to come and do Mrs. Potts
Wow.
on Beauty and the Beast.
Right.
And, that's how things happen. You get an opportunity and you do your best. And sometimes people see it and they go, oh, this guy would be good here.
Right.
It's like actors, and so I did that. And then because of my strength of Potts, Ron and John asked me to do the Sultan in Aladdin.
Oh, very cool.
And,
Great
and
character.
then, I started branching off into different areas and doing different things like the highly stylized hummingbird in Pocahontas
Flit.
and whatnot. You have to be able, you can't just draw the way you draw. You have to be able to be flexible for the art direction of each specific film. So there was a challenge on every film.
Right.
So,
wow.
And that's kind of the way that happened. How I became a supervisor was being pulled onto the short.
when you were put on when you were put on Beauty and the Beast doing Mrs. Potts, it was basically Mrs. Potts and Chip, right? It was the two characters,
well,
or was it
not
just?
In it at first.
Oh, he was added.
Chip was added in the last few months of production. They got the kid that did the voice was so good, and it was just a throwaway gag. It's the cup of the teacher now, Chip. And he had a chip on his cup, and everybody just thought that was so cute. And the kid was so good. His voice was so superb, his performance, that Jeffrey said, we got to get this character in more.
Wow.
And so I remember the meeting where he said, we need Chip here, we need Chip there. And we had like 3 months left to animate. And he looks at me, he goes, do you think you can do it, Dave? And I go, yeah, if you get me another animator to help me. Yeah. We can do it. And we did.
Wow.
We did. But there was a music box character that had already been started to be animated by another very good animator. I think Lenny Graves was his name. And unfortunately, that character ended up on the cutting room floor. He didn't talk. They made musical notes. It was very cute and very sweet.
Right.
But they wanted to replace that character with the Chip character.
Right.
And so that's unfortunate, but it even happened to Ward Kimball. So we all end up on
you're right there with the legend. There you go.
Yes, exactly.
And you're a legend all your own. So
yeah, and that's how Chip came to be.
Wow.
It was just a great voice and a really cute idea, and it just took off.
There you go. Happy stuff that happens.
Yeah,
that's wonderful. Yeah. Dave, I want to have another interview with you if that's possible, and that'd be great to just have you back on, talk about some of the other stuff that you worked on. Thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Do you have any questions or comments about the podcast? Please email Brian at cartoonerific.com. Your email may be featured in one of our future shows.
That was really a cool interview. I learned a lot of stuff from it. I hope you did too. These interviews are sometimes very, very fun for me. I get so much information out of them. And, Dave is a great guest. So maybe in the future we'll have him back. I would love to have him back. Hopefully we'll have him back. What do you think? Let me know your thoughts. Well, I don't know about you, but I could go for a nice cold milkshake right about now. No? Oh, all right. Hey, look, if you really like what you're listening to, please subscribe. Go to your favorite service out there that does these podcasts and just click on the subscribe button, and then you'll be notified when the next Cartoonerific podcast is uploaded for your enjoyment. How about that? If you really like what you're listening to, please tell a friend. That's always a good thing. Just go out there, just tell people. Just say, hey, Brian Mitchell is really kind of a cool guy, and his podcast is okay. Yeah, give the rousing review, okay? Anyway, we have some great guests coming up next week. Popeye Expert, Mr. Fred Grandinetti. He'll be on. It's going to be a great show. Anyway, I want you all to have a great day. Have an excellent week. And thank you once again for tuning in. See ya.
This has been a Cartoonerific Studios presentation.
The Cartoonerific podcast is copyright 2024 by Cartoonerific Studios Incorporated. All rights reserved.